Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
Now you're very welcome along to Wednesday Night Rugby. Happy to say Niamh Briggs, Grand Slam winner, is with us. Hey Niamh.
Hi, how are you?
Very well. And Rúaidhrí O'Connor from the Irish Independent. Come on in. Hello, Rory.
Hey Joe, hey Niamh.
It has
Hi,
been a day, Rory, where Callum Robinson has grabbed the headlines. So, not surprisingly, somebody, it may well have been you, I'm not even too sure. I just saw the headline. Somebody was onto the IRFU to check what the current vaccination rate is across our professional team structures, and they were quite forthcoming with the percentage.
Yeah, and not surprisingly, given the number, it was. I put the request into the IRFU earlier today. Munster were at Graham Rowntree was asked about it at the Munster press conference. I didn't want to go into it, so I asked the question, and the rate is 99.2% of all staff, players, and coaches have been vaccinated at this point. Some, I think, have only had one dose, but are on their way to having their second. So it's well above, I think, the national average. It's well above what we're hearing from other sports, and I suppose it puts the IRFU and Irish rugby in a pretty strong position when it comes to the season ahead and trying to navigate through potentially tricky waters down the line, that they can do so with a bit of confidence that they'll be able to fulfil their end of the bargain when it comes to fixtures. Because
rugby increasingly can be more on the withholding end of the spectrum when it comes to medical information than forthcoming. But I suppose here they're more than happy to come out front and centre today of all days and say, don't come near us, we're good. Yeah, in fairness to them, we did ask rather than giving us the information to make anyone else look bad. But yeah, I think they were pretty happy to get that out there. I think they were even surprised themselves by how high the figure was when they compiled it and put all the four provinces together. It just, as I say, there's not a huge amount to say about it because it is so strong. Because I think it's a talking point when the numbers are down, and I'm sure there's a socio-economic or kind of a sociological study that could be done on why the uptake has been so high above rugby players. Haven't thought about it that much myself, but there's definitely, it's an incredibly good number. It's a very positive news story for the RFU to be able to tell, and I suppose it reflects very well on the players themselves who've taken, and the coaches and the staff behind the scenes who've taken it up. It's a good example for everyone, I think. Yeah. The other story, which again there may not be all that much to say about it, but has made some back pages and caught the eye, no pun intended here, is about a change that will be coming to rugby, it seems. In particular, red and green kit clashes will be a thing of the past in international matches to help sufferers of colour blindness. So they want to get this done for the 2027 World Cup at the latest. Turns out Bill Bowman, the World Rugby chairman, suffers from colour blindness, so he was out very much to the fore talking about this, and he said, from our perspective, if you're potentially limiting 8% of your male audience, that's a huge number of people who are suddenly switching off a game, is what he said. And I don't know if you've seen the pictures. I saw a few newspapers showing what a Wales-Ireland match looks like to somebody who's colourblind. And effectively, look, everybody they all have the white shorts, but then it's probably just 30 players running around in brown jerseys and brown socks is how it looks to someone with colour blindness. So that's end of an era for the rest of us in terms of the green and the red. Yeah, absolutely it is. But I suppose if it's an accessibility issue, we should make the game as accessible as possible for the people who can't experience it in the way that we can. And it seems like a pretty simple fix. I'm sure the unions will welcome the chance to show off their shiny second jerseys. Ireland don't often get to do that, only when they play South Africa. So I'm sure they'll be happy with that side of things. Not to suggest there's a cynical end to it, but the end of an era. But it's a small price to pay, I suppose, if you are enhancing the viewing experience for a small, for a significant proportion of people who are not able to enjoy it. Well, 8%. I mean, it's amazing. Actually, it's endured this long. Niamh, colour blindness. Are you able to watch Ireland-Wales fine?
Yeah, I am. I actually thought it was a mad stat today. I think I read that was 1 in 12 males suffer from colour blindness, which is pretty big when you put it into the context of, probably a watching and playing population. So, I agree with Rory. I think if we're making the game more accessible all round, then, why not?
So, to the weekend's rugby that was, and we'll have a look ahead to what's coming up. Niamh, in broad terms, what have you made of the opening to the United Rugby Championship?
Yeah, look, I think it's exciting. I think the South African element, albeit we haven't seen, close score lines or big kind of. I think it's been tough for them given that they're away from home and without their top players. But in saying that, I think they've definitely provided an idea of where the tournament is going to be once everybody's back in shape. And I think from that element, you've got to be excited. I think if you're from an Irish province, you've got to be happy with how they've all started. And yeah, look, I think it's been a good few weeks, to be fair.
Rory, I think the TV coverage has probably helped it as well. I mean, and this is a terrible thing to say when it's, TG Carr is our national language, but certainly on RTE, given the full treatment and analysis you can get your teeth into and watch and primetime kickoff times, I think that probably hasn't done this competition any harm at all. I know there are still games on TG Carr and no problems with that whatsoever, but just as a floating voter, sometimes when you're not able to follow what's going on necessarily, that didn't help the competition, I felt at times.
I think it's a fair point. I think what was more damaging was, and I worked with Air a little bit, and I thought Air did a really good job on it, but Air just wasn't accessible to people. Air Sports, there was whole tranches of the population who just couldn't even pay for it if they wanted to. It was quite expensive if you were a Sky customer to get Air. If you were a Virgin Media customer, you couldn't get it because of a dispute, and it just took the whole thing behind a closed door. So TG Carr at least was accessible to people. You could, if you had a problem with the Irish or not, you still could watch the game. Whereas with the deal that was there before RTE, a lot of people couldn't even watch it. But I do think having it on free to air, the resources RTE have put behind it in terms of the number of people that have covered it at the games, they're giving it the big game treatment, and I think it's benefiting from that. It just needs the games to kind of back that up. I think Munster Stormers was a really good game on Saturday night. Leinster Dragons is less so on a Sunday kind of graveyard slot on a Sunday lunchtime, but that's the competition we're in. RTE can only do what they're deal with what they're handed with, and I think I think it's definitely giving a greater exposure to a tournament that definitely didn't have it in the last couple of years.
Yeah, like for instance, I was one of the Virgin customers. I couldn't get Air. It was never quite big enough reason to go to the hassle of switching over and trying to do all that rigmarole. So I was just working off TG Carr in the main. What about you, Niamh? Have you found maybe the new broadcasting arrangements have helped a little bit, or no great difference on that front to you?
Yeah, no, look, I had Air, but to be fair, I think the production between RTE and TG Carr has been really good. I think, for example, the difference in terms of being able to go to Bernard Jackman or Murray Kinsella on the sideline and talk about analysis, I think, for a rugby nerd, it's really good. It buys you in, and obviously then the punditry, I suppose, is of a really good caliber as well, so people are tuning in. But I agree with Rory. I think the quality of game probably helps as well, and there was definitely 3 good quality games this weekend from an Irish perspective.
Yeah, so Rory mentioned Munster as maybe the more interesting one. Game of 2 halves in the extreme, Niamh. What was your sense of how Munster will feel about that afterwards? Because Johan van Graan was absolutely playing up the positives and talking about how they adapted, and he's thrilled they adapted when he was asked about the fact they were very much forward-oriented tries. He was swatting that away, saying, no, we're thrilled with the way that we took the Stormers' challenge and reacted.
Yeah, and I kind of have to agree with him. I was at the game and I couldn't get over how physically big the Stormers were. Like, their wingers were as big as our back row. And I think it took a while for Munster to get a handle on that, to get a handle on the pace. They were probably one of the only South African teams that looked to play to an edge, and they got change out of it. I think big turning point for me was O'Mahony's save under the posts, because you go in at half time 14-7 down as opposed to, or 15-7 down as opposed to 19 or 21 or whatever it would have been. It's a different conversation, and I think they came out in the second half really haven't gotten to grips with that physicality. I also thought the Stormers ran out a bit of steam. I think when Munster scored that try just before half time, you could visibly see them on their hands and knees, some of them behind the posts. They were blowing really hard, and I think, from a Munster kind of psychological point of view, you walk in at half time and think, okay, we didn't have the ball for probably 25, 28 minutes of that half, and they've played all the rugby, and physically they look under pressure and we're only one score behind. And I think that just generally transforms that halftime talk. But they played some good rugby for sure. Definitely still areas that they've got to tidy up, I think. And I think they'll be a little bit disappointed with the opening 2 tries from the Stormers, albeit, they were coming. But I think that there were defensive mistakes on the inside as opposed to brilliant play by the Stormers. But look, I think they'll be really happy with a bonus point win at the end of that.
What about you, Rory, and the point of how they managed to get those bonus point tries being used against them a touch?
I think they have to go that way if that's the way to win the game. And if the Stormers are offering that way into a win, you got to take it. And the way to beat the Stormers on Saturday was to go through them. And Munster did that brilliantly and got the reward for it. If they do that every week over the course of the season, I think it won't be good enough to beat the best teams come the business end of the season. And that's where Munster have fallen down. Like Leinster played that game against them in the RDS in the Pro 14 final last season and wiped the floor with them. And I think it's all about having some variation. It does happen quite frequently that Munster may win the game at Thomond Park, but it's the visiting team who play the majority of the rugby. Towards the end of last season, Cardiff played unbelievable rugby, sparkling rugby at Thomond Park, and ended up on the losing side. Connacht beat them by playing really good rugby, and Munster almost went because it had worked for them earlier in the season. They almost kept going back to that direct style over the course of the year, which I think is a mistake. Just because it worked against the Stormers last weekend, I don't think should be their game plan going into the Scarlets this weekend. I think they have to keep developing the other sides of that game, because when they come up against, say, a Toulon or a Toulouse or a La Rochelle or a Leinster down the line, it won't be enough to get them through. But if you're down by that much, with coming up to half time, and it's the only way to go win a game, there's no shame in going and winning it that way. It's just you have to have the other strings to your bow.
Yeah, because I suppose, Niamh, the concern would be, even with a beefed up pack and the likes of Sneeman in and fit, Munster can't expect to be able to outpower the bigger European teams. I mean, maybe they're in a position now to really match them and to go to, we saw what La Rochelle did to Leinster, for instance, last year, to go to those kind of places and maybe hold their own, but they certainly won't dominate. So therefore, I think we're all looking to see a bit more craft and a bit more creativity, and we've been saying that for some time about Munster in the bigger games, I think. So that's probably where I'm coming from when I'm asking these questions about, is it somewhat underwhelming to see them win in a way that they probably can't replicate in the latter stages of a European Cup or against a Leinster?
Look, I'm not sure about that. I think when you have a fully stacked team and the likes of Delande and Chris Farrell are back in, then that makes a different kind of a centre partnership that offers probably something different than what was there the other day. I think at the moment,
but will that even with those guys back, is that big enough to dominate Leinster? Like, there was absolutely no sign of that, for instance, in the final last year. It was a lack of craft which cost them in that game, for instance. That's where I'm coming from on that point.
Yeah, no, and I understand where you're coming from. I just think I just feel like there's something different this year. We see them play to the edges a little bit more than we've probably possibly done before. They're actually, I think Sibo's second try in round one, I think, kind of shows that they're looking to probably move the ball a little more. They're looking to play even in around that tight. They're not really running into bodies anymore. They're more running into spaces around the bodies, which, I was critical of last year. I felt like that they didn't offer enough in terms of the ball carry. So I think a lot of things like that come with there's like loads of little different metrics, their ability to carry in and around soft shoulders, their clear out, you get quicker ball on the back of that. And at times the other day, they didn't have that in the first half. And they seem to have a lot of miscommunication, for example, between Coombs and Casey a couple of times, but they've managed to work around it. And I think that's a huge positive. And okay. Look, I'm not sure it's enough to beat. Right now, it's enough to beat, the bigger teams. But I think that you've got to work your way into it. And I think that there was definitely moments the other day when you saw small little plus passes that we wouldn't have seen before. We looked to, get to the edges a little bit more than we would have beforehand with handling as opposed to with our boot. And I think that that's got to be the way for Munster. I don't think that they're going to physically beat anybody up front at times, but they have handling ability. Like that back row, their second row partnership, like the Simon, but even just Thomas Ahern, these kind of guys, they can all play rugby and they all have really good handling skills. And I think if you look to nourish and evolve those type of players to be able to, play another phase, be able to keep the ball alive, to be able to anticipate and offload, well then for me that's a big evolution for Munster from last season, and I think it can only be a positive thing.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, because I was watching the first half and I definitely would subscribe to the view that the Stormers were just wiped, tired, gassed somewhere in the second half, but in the first half when they were full of energy and going strong against Munster, we maybe saw them, Rory, get to the touchline, as Niamh's talking about there, with their handling maybe a bit once you could really count, and I think it led actually to the Peter O'Mahony, the try cancelled. He was a third man latching, and you kind of just, for a lot of that game, felt like it was just Craig Casey kicking the ball away for Munster for too much of that game. And again, I'm being deliberately harsh here almost to kind of test where you guys are at, but my sense watching it was, well, there might be little increments, but it's certainly nothing drastic here.
No, and it's, year 3 of the Stephen Larkham project, and there's this eternal struggle that looks like from behind the scenes between the South African influence and the Australian influence and the English influence of Graham Rowntree, and the second half looked more like the kind of English South African model as opposed to the kind of the highly kind of structured attacking Stephen Larkham game. And it's that kind of identity of the coaching ticket that you're kind of trying to tease out all the time. It's fascinating to watch. We hear that Stephen Larkham has a much greater influence this year. Graham Rowntree, there's quotes in tomorrow's papers about how good a job Larkham is doing there. But there is, and I think there's an arch conservatism to the way that Johan van Graan wants to play. He is from that South African school. We've seen at international level what South Africa want to do. There's a lot of South African players in there. Not a lot, but there's a good contingent of South African players in there. They had Rassie Erasmus and Jock Nienaber as their coaches beforehand. There's just a struggle there all the time, I think, between the two. And, having different ways to play is a real strength when it works. And there's nothing wrong with going tight when that's the way to go, as I said earlier. There are, as Niamh pointed out, different strands to the game. And it's really early in the season. It's only 2 games in. I think after Sunday, when they go to Scarlets away, we'll know a bit more about where they stand, because that's a tough fixture. They, having 2 South African teams first up, it's a bit of an unknown, but they're 2 teams that they should be beating, and they've beaten them. There's bigger tests to come for this Munster team, and bigger tests of the way they want to play as well. Yeah, no,
that's totally all fair as well. Scarlets away on Sunday, they have Connacht at home in week 4, and then Ospreys away week 5, and then they'll take the international break. So that's a decent sample size, those 5 weeks. Niamh, I'm sure your eye was probably, it's great you're at the game, you can get such a feel for things there. I'm sure your eye was drifting towards Joey Carbery quite a bit and trying to get a sense of what he was trying to do and where he was in his return, I guess, which is ongoing. He's been, I wouldn't say criticised in the main, but listening to various things, it has certainly been noted that with the pre-season under his belt and everything else, he certainly hasn't pitched up in a way that looks like he's ready to grab the jersey from Johnny Sexton in the absolute short term, i.e. November, with his form.
Yeah, no, and I think it was another kind of a mismatch game the other day. I think watching him live, he can obviously, he just glides over the ground and he looks like he's not even running quickly. And then, he's just, he has moments of magic. For me, though, when you look at playing 10 and bossing it, I think the jury's still out on it. I think.
And when you say bossing it, Niamh, I think we all have a feel for that and how it looks. But for you, for instance, give us some examples of, terrible to compare him to a Sexton or an O'Gara, but when they needed to boss something, like in that game when things weren't going well, what wasn't he doing that they might have done?
Yeah, look, I just felt at times Munster were going across the pitch when they managed to hold on to the ball for a few phases. They were quite lateral, and he's got to be the one to move that pack around, or his outside backs, so that they're coming onto the ball pace, they're coming on square. And I think when he drifts with the ball, I'm not sure what's outside him understands what he's going to do, maybe, or that, that they can't straighten it for him. Look, I've been saying it for a while now. I think 15 is probably his best position, because his ability to be able to see, his ability to be able to be a second playmaker when there's no pressure on, but also to, he's such a good broken field runner. I don't know, do we get the best out of him at 10? Now, it's probably not a very popular decision to say, or a very popular opinion to have, but I just think at times the other day, it was almost like Joey / Munster were kind of running out of options of what they were doing or where they were going. And you don't often see that, I think, when Sexton or O'Gara, and I don't like comparing because they're all incredibly different players, but to be that assertive and to be in that 10 role, you've got to be able to understand that when you're on the front foot, you know, passing or kicking, you've got to be able to choose or pick the right option. And I felt at times when we couldn't get gain line, especially in that first half, we just kind of seemed to run up a few blind alleys. And there was definitely space. You're looking at, you know, a pot of carry outside of Craig Casey. And if you look to go out the back of that and outside, you know, it's almost like a double, I don't know what the ordinary supporter would call it, but you know, a spot play where they go, you know, wide out the back of hard runners. Mm-hmm. And I felt like that there was space to do that and he had time to do it. And we just didn't seem to maybe see it. I don't know.
And
but
have you, it's a really interesting point. Have you seen him see it in previous games, or has this always been a slight concern of yours?
No, and you see, I don't know, because I don't know what Munster are doing. I don't know how they're trained. I don't know how they want to play in terms of it's not something that they look to do, I think. You know, you look at, say, if you compare it to, say, someone like a Finn Russell type player, and Joey's quite similar because he's quite a maverick on the ball and he's got exceptional skills, but he runs so flat to the line and he's able to pull passes back because there's a two-line tack, whereas I don't think Munster really have that, and I think that's maybe where he falls off. And I think he did so well when he was at Leinster because they did have that, if that makes sense. So they did have that two-line attack. And I think if you're going to play Joey in a 10, then you've got to give him the freedom to express himself. And so I don't know whether it's a lack of confidence from himself coming back from an injury or a game plan for Munster that they don't want to, or whether it's just a balance in between that. But like, I'd love to see a Jack Crowley, Ben Healy type of a 10 with Joey at fullback, and just to see whether that combination works. I think his best performances for Ireland have been at 15. And,
well, I was just going to ask, are Ireland more inclined to play with a shape that might suit Carbery at 10 more so than Munster?
Yeah, maybe. I think, look, I think Ireland's attack has definitely evolved over the last season. You know, we've been quite critical about it up until maybe the last, well, you have too, to be fair.
I just asked the questions.
For the last while, and I do think that it got better as the Six Nations went on into the summer tour. So, look, we've got to see it. And you're also looking at a pack too that are, you know, you've got to try, and for players like Joey to be on that front foot, you've got to be winning the gain line, and you've got to be coming onto the ball quick, and you've got to set tempo.
Yeah.
I think when Munster at times go backwards, you know, or don't make that, the ball is slowed down, it doesn't suit him.
No, fair enough. The worrying thing there from an Irish point of view, I suppose, Rory, is that Ireland certainly need Joey Carbery to work out at 10, looking at their options at the moment in the medium term.
Absolutely. I don't think it's unfair to compare him to Ronan O'Gara or Johnny Sexton, because that's how he's comparing himself. I mean, Joey Carbery's gone on record as saying he wants to be the best player in the world, and this was before of his injury. He's obviously still on a bit of a comeback trail, but he's had a full pre-season now. I did speak to him in March or April after his kind of initial comeback from the injury, and he said it does take him a couple of games to get up and running, which I think is fair enough for any player. At the same time, if you compare him to the kind of, say, that Gloucester performance away from home in the European Cup, he's nowhere near the level that he got to that time that day. And I think what Niamh raises with the 15 thing is a very legitimate question. But Leinster certainly thought his best position was 15. That's why they wanted to keep Ross Byrne and Joey Carbery on board as almost, you know, to play together in the post Johnny Sexton era. Right now, Johnny Sexton on form is still the number 1, number 10. The question Andy Farrell must be asking himself in his head is how long can he persist with Johnny Sexton as his number 1 out half if he's going to be 38 at the next World Cup? Can he hope for a Tom Brady like maintenance of standards, or does he have to start just going with a younger player to try and at least future-proof the team so that if Johnny doesn't make it, he has someone else there with enough minutes under his belt? It's been something we've probably talked about every week in this call, you know, for a long time, but it's still the burning issue for the Irish rugby team. Joey Carbery is the strongest of the alternative options, but right now he's not playing at his best, and that must be a bit of a concern for Andy Farrell.
Yeah, well,
I just think also too.
Sorry, Niamh.
You know, he missed quite a few tackles as well week 1, and he missed a couple of last week as well. And I think, you know, they spoke about Ronan O'Gara's defence and you know, where teams used to basically line him up and be able to run over him. And, you know, to be fair to him, he never shirked away from it. And I think that's an element too that, you know, if you're Andy Farrell, I think even if you're Johan van Graan, you've got to be a little bit concerned about are you inviting teams down that channel because your defensive qualities as 10 isn't as strong?
Yeah, fair point. Well, we'll see how the next couple of weeks go. Rugby coverage is with thanks to Vodafone here and Off the Ball, sponsors of the Irish Rugby team of us, everyone in. We're talking with Niamh Briggs and Rúaidhrí O'Connor. Connacht we should absolutely mention. So TG Carr got a great interview, in fairness, with Jake White pre-game, where I think Jake White's going to be fun. The United Rugby Championship needs some needle, needs some selling points, needs some characters, and Jake White more than played the pantomime villain. So I don't know to what extent this had any effect on the match itself, because it's not like these comments were bubbling away all week. This is literally the pre-game coach interview on TG Carr. Jake White, what do you know about Connacht?
A lot of Leinster players who come down from Leinster. Obviously, the guys who didn't get contracts up there come down. Yeah, it's very similar to a couple of franchises we have in South Africa. When they don't get contracted by the big unions, they go down to the small provinces, and then obviously try and find a way in which they can get noticed by the bigger provinces. So yeah, we're used to playing that sort of opposition, and I think again it'll be nothing different. They'll be wanting to front up, especially after last week they lost the game.
I mean, Jake, this isn't your first rodeo. It's very simple. They're a great team. They've great players, passionate support, utmost respect. Going to be a tough game. Thanks very much. Cheers. Bye. So, I don't know, honest to a fault here. And it's not like Niamh, like what he's saying is not true in certain respects. Like, there is a truth about Connacht. Hell, the IRFU were half thinking about getting rid of Connacht at some stage. There are players from other provinces there whose first choice was not Connacht. Like, there is an aspect to it which is true. But to say it publicly, needless to say, has not gone down well in Connacht. I don't suspect, maybe I'm wrong here, you're the player, you'd have a sense, I don't suspect this was mentioned in the Connacht dressing room pre-game. They'd have done well to hear it, unless they were all sitting watching the coverage live and then it was the perfect team talk. I don't know, but Jake White was honest to a fault there. Yeah,
and look, I think Andy Friend said it so well afterwards, so well informed. I think you could say that about every province in Ireland, which makes sense given the population of Dublin and Leinster. There's always going to be players that won't make their academy and into their senior squad. So, they're trying to earn a living and they want to be involved in an Irish shirt. That's their hopes and dreams. So they're, clearly going to move to another province to try and do that. So, and I think the fact that they didn't hear it and they didn't have to use it makes the performance even all the better. I think Connacht were so good. They're such a joy to watch when they play like that. I think Andy Friend's done a brilliant job with them. He plays to their strengths, and I think the thing that's going to catch them, or that has questioned about them before, is consistency. And if they can match the performance that they had the other day with a consistent number of games going forward, then it's going to put them in a really good shape for this coming season.
Yeah. A friend, by the way, did say afterwards, he was asked, is it water off a duck's back? He said it's not water off a duck's back because it happens too much, in my view, as in that kind of thing said about Connacht. It's just another comment that you store up and go, right, oh, that's what people think. It's frustrating because I know there's a lot more to Connacht rugby than a heap of blokes coming down from Leinster trying to pick up contracts. There's a lot more to what we were about and what we were doing and what we've done in the past. To me, it's just an ill-informed comment. But yeah, listen, they mount and it does build a little bit of frustration. And I guess the key point that Jake White missed, Rory, and it's what Niamh alluded to, is the players that are there are massively invested. The coach is massively invested, and they play a brand of rugby which compares very favourably with any other province on the island.
Absolutely. I mean, I like anything that hurts. There's an element of truth to what Jake White says, and Jake White, it has a history of making comments like this before games that come back to bite him in the ass, going back to Ireland, South Africa 2004, when he said none of the Irish players would get into the South African team, which caused a massive media furore that lasted nearly 10 days. So it's water off duck's back, I think, for him. And I think Bernard Jackman's column on Sunday would have given people an idea of where Jake is coming from. He's got his World Cup medal and he doesn't really care what other people think. But no, Connacht are a great addition to this tournament. They are always very good to watch. The players, no matter where they come from, seem to, certainly under Andy Friend and under Pat Lam before him, they go down. If they're not from Connacht, they become Connacht players very quickly. They buy in and they use whatever story they have as a badge of honour almost. If you're rejected by Leinster or Munster and you found your way into Connacht, Connacht is your vehicle to prove those people wrong. So I think they're very good at turning that into a strength, that kind of brotherhood of almost. I talked to Alex Wootton about it last year. He came down from Munster and he says, we all have something to prove down here, and that's, you can turn that. Our facilities aren't as good, our stadium is not as shiny as all the others, but we turn this on to a strength and an advantage. And when they play like they did on Friday night, they're a force to be reckoned with. The issue for them is being able to do that week in, week out over the course of a long season in a difficult competition. And that's where they'll be tested. And I think having a chip on your shoulder, Andy Friend has this is manna from heaven, really. He may be genuinely upset about it, but he'll also use it to his own advantage.
Yeah. We didn't really touch on Ulster too much on Monday. I mean, they had a very facile win in the end against Zebre, 36 points to 3. Bonus point against Glasgow the week before. One of the names, Niamh, I don't know how much you've seen of Nathan Doak, but he certainly caught the eye against Glasgow, 19 years of age. John Cooney came off injured against Glasgow. He came on, scored a try, made his first competitive start then against Zebre. Certainly looked very positive at scrum half, added a tempo, great running lines on a few occasions. Have you seen much of him?
Yeah, I watched a little bit of him underage, I think. And to be fair to Ulster, their ability to churn out youngsters, they obviously have a really good academy system up there. Not just Nate Doak, but also Ethan Coughlin, James Hume, these guys, Robert Balcoon, David McCann. Like, these could all be potential Irish internationals at senior level. And Doak, he's definitely got a huge amount of talent, and goal kicker too, and been in an environment like that, learning from John Cooney will only be a good thing for him. But he looks to have a really good temperament, and I think that's probably going to be a thing that will keep him separated from the rest, because I think, when you're that young and you jump into senior rugby, you can kind of not lose yourself, but almost try and play a different game. And to be fair, he hasn't, and he seems incredibly talented, incredibly grounded, but also just a really well-rounded athlete. So I think, look, I'd say Ulster are delighted that so many of them have popped up, because their injury list seems to be lengthening by the day, to be fair to them. So it's been a really good 2 weeks for them, to be fair, and for him personally. Yeah.
And Rory, just the last one, Dragon 6, Leinster 7. Leinster plays Zebre at home Saturday coming, Scarlets in week 4. So let's see how they get on over the next couple of weeks. It's hard to say much about this game because it was just so bad and they were just so average by their standards. Even Leinster are entitled to a terrible one-off performance. I mean, it's not like the week before was anything to worry about. So I don't really know what conclusions you draw about that 80 minutes.
No, I think if you were looking at Leinster over the course of the last 6 months and you take into account that they lost to Connacht and Ospreys, and they lost that game to Munster after after the La Rochelle game. Losing to La Rochelle obviously is a different kettle of fish in a big European game. There is, having gone on that whopper unbeaten run, which included a 3-0 win away to Zebre, but it was a long time when they were largely picking up bonus point wins, either home or away, no matter who was in the jersey. There is a bit of concern there that maybe the strength and depth is not quite what it was. But you look at the names on the team sheet, even on Sunday, and you think it's probably an aberration that those players, it's just early season stuff, that maybe the Dragons are coming up to scratch a little bit more under Dean Ryan, that they've kind of a very young squad, but with some very good experienced Welsh internationals there as well, in a difficult stadium on a Sunday in difficult conditions. Maybe it was probably an aberration, but there's a few there that Leinster won't be happy with, and no doubt they'll bounce back and hammer Zebre at the weekend. But I think it's those games where Sexton isn't there in particular that it's worth keeping an eye on a little bit, just to see if there's a bit of a trend forming in terms of the kind of the dip down with Scott Fardy gone and Easton Asiwa long gone at this stage.
Okay. Niamh Briggs, Rúaidhrí O'Connor, great to have you both on. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks a million.
Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.